Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for your patience with us today. My name is Brittany Campbell, and on behalf of the Business Law Society, I want to tell you how excited we are to present you with the insider scoop on business law. We have three very knowledgeable Albany Law professors here with us today, Professor Reyhan, Professor Chung, and Professor Boll. And I know you're here to learn from them rather than listen to me, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, for the benefit of students who don't already have the pleasure of knowing our panelists, our first question for each of you is to please introduce yourself and give us some background about who you are. We can start with Professor Reyhan and work our way across.
Hi, my name is Patricia Reyhan. I'm the elder statesman of this group. I've been teaching at the school on and off since 1980. And I always say to my business organization students, when I first taught business organizations, a few states were dealing with LLCs, but very few of them. So I've taught long enough to watch a lot of business law change, not just incrementally, but change massively. Unlike the other two members of the panel, I did not have an extensive practice in business law before I started teaching, but I've had occasion to do a fair amount of consulting, particularly in the international business field since then.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Chung. I've been teaching here since 2007, contracts, business, and securities law related courses. Before coming into teaching, I was a partner at a large Boston-based law firm called Goodwin Procter. And in between stints in private practice, I also served as a branch chief in the enforcement division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So I come at business law a little bit from a white collar crime perspective, hoping that, but, just sort of thinking about transactions, regulatory, like heavily regulated environments, financial services, securities markets.
Hi, Jennifer Boll. I've also been teaching here since 2007.
Is that true?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
But I'm an adjunct professor, so I typically only teach one course per semester. I'm also a partner at Boll, King, which is a regional law firm. We have offices all throughout New York State, also offices in Florida and Overland Park, Kansas. My practice is focused on corporate law, tax law, and actually T&E work, which I can explain later how all of those sort of intersect with each other, especially in a market like in upstate New York. I have 3 kids, 1 grandchild, and find time for everything. I also teach at Albany as an adjunct as well in their master's in taxation program. Oh, yes, I do want to say what I teach. Excellent courses. I teach state and interstate taxation in the fall here, and I typically teach business basics for lawyers in the spring, which is also a really excellent course.
Take that course.
Take that course.
And Professor Boll has also taught corporate tax right from time to time.
Yes, I've taught corporate tax and partnership tax. At Albany, I teach survey of taxation, state and interstate taxation, IRS practice and procedure.
I can say I am currently taking her tax class, so for those of you who can take it in the future, do consider it. So our next question we'd like to have you answer is, could you please tell us about your career paths? Where have you worked and what kind of work have you done?
Someone else wants to go first, since my career path is the most boring.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. So, I'll start sort of with college. Well, personal life, I knew no lawyers. I knew nothing about law. I had no experience with that at all. My parents had high school educations and just thought, college was important. So I went to Siena for college. I majored in history. I enjoyed it very much. I wanted to be a history professor. Spoke with my history professor about that, and he said, don't do that. You should become a lawyer. And I said, well, what would that entail? And he said, take the LSATs and you apply to law school and you'll be very good at it. It's reading and writing, all the things you like. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. So I took the LSATs, I did well. I applied to some Ivy League schools and got in. So I went to Harvard, where Professor Chung went as well, right? And that was a great experience. Again, knowing nothing about law, I didn't know what kind of law I might want to practice. And I summered at Boll, and King, my first summer actually. And I really enjoyed it there because it was, I liked the culture. The work was challenging, but very different from the work at a national firm where I summered the second year, was in terms of just a little bit more family oriented. The lifestyle was something I could see myself doing for a lifetime. And so I did go there after law school, left there a few years later and practiced at actually a small firm, a boutique firm. We only had about 10 lawyers. I did that for about 15 years. And then I became a partner at Hudson Russ, which is a firm very similar to Boll, and King, also a regional firm in the business law department. And then I went back to Bond a few years later, now maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and really enjoying practicing there for all the reasons I went there when I first started. And the areas of practice that I fell into really just were what people gave me to do that I like. So I've done litigation and I've done some securities work even over the years. And I've done, I really liked the tax work. I really liked the corporate work, M&A work. And then somebody told me I had to do T&E. And I said, well, I didn't even take T&E in law school. I don't like T&E. I don't want to do that. And they said, give it a try. So I did. And I actually really do enjoy T&E work. I enjoy it very much. So that's very rewarding to help clients meet those kinds of goals too.
One thing I want to note right away that's interesting is, so when I was in private practice, I was at large law firms in cities, first Chicago, then Boston. And as between regional and large firms, you know, the biggest difference that I saw was that in large firms, you tend to have more of a niche practice. You're less of a generalist, whereas practicing in a smaller legal market means that you might be doing more different kinds of work. Like the litigation department would never do the corporate work at a large firm. I mean, you consult on the deal, like for litigation risk management, but you wouldn't do the deal. Whereas in a smaller market, you might do some litigation, right? You know, you might handle a litigation matter that, for example, arises out of a corporate transaction that you worked on. So you're more specialized in that's not the right word. It's just the practice is more narrow in large law firms in cities. It doesn't mean that you as a lawyer couldn't be, or you know, but that's an interesting difference in terms of your experience. And again, where I started off, which was a firm called Jenner & Block in Chicago. So I grew up in the Albany area. My dad is a graduate of Albany Law School, as is my sister, and we were in law school at the same time, which was sort of interesting to compare because it's very different. So I grew up in this area, and I decided after my first year of law school, I summered at Whiteman Osterman. And then I decided that I really wanted to leave Albany because I had lived overseas during college and sort of a travel bug. I had lived in Japan for 2 years working as a translator. And so I decided that I wanted to go to Chicago. I had also met a partner at the firm that I ultimately went to that I really respected and is still to this day a wonderful mentor to me. And so I went to Jenner & Block and worked there for 3 years. And it was awesome. I mean, the Chicago market is very different from where I had grown up, and I enjoyed it. We decided to move back to the East Coast for a variety of personal and professional reasons. And so I went initially to a firm called Testa Hurwitz in Boston, which was very much an entrepreneur, high-tech entrepreneur sort of shop. So there's Testa on the East Coast and Wilson Sonsini on the West Coast, right? Eventually, basically, for a variety of reasons, Testa kind of dissolved itself. And the group of us that did securities and white collar crime moved on to Goodwin Procter. A group of us moved on to Goodwin Procter. And that was ultimately where I became a partner. In the interim, I served again as a branch chief in the Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division, which was awesome. And I would recommend government practice as a way to kind of jumpstart your career. I think government practice can be great. And then from being a partner at Goodwin, I then transitioned into teaching. I decided to I thought it was going to be a sabbatical. And that was like 2007. So that's, but I had always taught and done CLEs, and the variety of reasons, personal and professional, again, why I decided to pursue this path. But I kind of kept the sort of safety net of, if I didn't like it, I could go back to Goodwin. And I never have, but that's what I told myself at the time, to make it less scary to completely change your career path in your 40s, in my 40s.
Well, Jennifer, I didn't know that you and I had this in common, but I too went to college intending to be a history professor. History was my great love. And I really had two goals, and they were related. And that was, I wanted to marry into great wealth, and I wanted to teach history in a small New England private school. And they were related because if one were able to get a job teaching history in a small New England private school, one better marry into great wealth. Because, yeah, you're not going to get the salary. I too was told by my mentor and favorite history professor that even the #1 student out of Yale history department would not get a history teaching job in that market. I was neither at Yale nor #1 in the place where I was. So I came to law school, as many students do, really because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to teach, but I didn't know that necessarily law was what I wanted to teach. During law school, therefore, I sort of took everything. I took all the business courses. I found them interesting, although I didn't have a passion for them at all. Then in my first job, the first client to whom I billed my first billable hour was Queen Elizabeth. And you don't want to start that way, because every client after that, and sometime we can talk about why Queen Elizabeth, but every client after that is a little more boring than your first client. But it did make me feel, even in a very distant way, that I was practicing international law, which I rather liked. I later clerked for the High Court of the state of Washington. My entire early life was on the West Coast, and did a lot of writing of opinions in business contexts while in that clerkship, and was allowed to have the luxury of time to really study the policies as well as the law behind the cases that my judge and the court were deciding. And that's where I started to find it really, really interesting, but always from the international perspective. I got an LLM and specialized in international law. And when I started teaching here, most of my plate of courses were in international law. So over the course of the first decade of teaching, I taught international law, private and public. I taught international commercial arbitration. I taught human rights law. I taught United Nations law. I taught a course I loved called Transnational Litigation in United States Courts. And both the international commercial arbitration course and the transnational litigation course had me then dipping my toes much more deeply back into business law. And then at some point, the then dean asked me to teach business organizations, and I was happy to do that and absolutely loved teaching it. When I came back after a long hiatus from being here, our current dean was nice enough to let me teach business organizations. As a matter of fact, the reason I was teaching business organizations is Professor Chung was writing her textbook on business organizations. So I sort of stepped in to take her place and just really, really enjoyed it. I commend all of you for being in Business Law Society and for coming here. My own view that many of you have heard is that every law student, whether they plan to practice business law or not, should develop a very deep familiarity with business law. One, because lawyers are expected to know general business, economic, financial concepts, and two, because you never know. As you hear from all of us, we do these weavings in and out of jobs. And even if one starts in law school thinking they're not doing business law, they may end up doing it. It touches on so many different areas, but it's just wonderful to see so many of you starting with this interest. And whether you go a different route, whether you find yourself loving to trust and estates at some point, this is a great place to start.
I just want to mention one follow-up thing. You know, when I was thinking about sort of teaching or what I wanted to do after law school, I just want to put in a plug for the students, as Professor Boll was saying, who might not have come. You know, my dad was a lawyer, but he was the first member of his family to go to college, let alone law school. His parents emigrated from Sicily, and we had a fruit and vegetable stand basically in what is now under the Empire State Plaza, the South Mall, in that Italian neighborhood that was kind of bulldozed over to build the plaza. And my mother is also an immigrant, so from Ireland. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do after law school, one, had borrowed every dime required to attend law school, and two, I felt very strongly that like I need to get a job because that's what you do when you're productive, right? So I didn't think that teaching, I had the luxury of pursuing a teaching career, and I probably didn't, realistically speaking. But if you have that passion for something, don't give up. You might have to wait a little bit, but you know that dream job may still come to you. You know, just maybe not right after law school. So the way we all came to the path might look a little different, but I think there's a piece of it, you know, we all found something that we loved and eventually we got there.
Thank you all for your insightful answers to that. And Professor Chung kind of helped us segue into our next question, which is to ask each of you to tell us about the biggest challenges you faced in your careers. One student that pre-submitted a question pointed out that all three of our panelists today are women, and they wanted to know if you faced any additional challenges being a woman in this field, or if perhaps it had any advantages.
Yes, there are lots of additional challenges that women face in the business field, particularly in M&A work. Most deals are still run by a lead male partner. There are a few female partners, especially at the bigger firms, but not very many. Many more women at the lower levels, you know, the associate level or the junior partner level. And that was the same when I started over 20 years ago. So I don't know where all the women went. You know, they haven't stayed at many of those types of firms. We also face, and actually just happened to me last week, speaking to a client who was referred by another lawyer about some tax issues. And I went through 10 minutes of discussion with her, another woman. And she looked at me and she said, "Now, are you a lawyer?" I said, yeah, I'm a lawyer. That's why you called me. So, you know,
That's why I'm charging you.
yes. So you get that too. Sometimes, you know, folks don't realize that because there's still some implicit bias. Most of our staff are women. And so, you know, people will naturally, when a woman answers the phone, they might assume, well, this may be the legal assistant, because all the legal assistants I've ever dealt with were women. So, you know, you're trying to make those connections, but it's changing. Positives are there aren't a lot of women who do what I do, especially locally. So that means I stand out pretty significantly, and that's helpful. So people remember you, and that's a really good thing when you're trying to get work through referrals. So a lot of work comes through accountants or financial advisors, and they know me. And they're not going to forget my name because I'm not one of, you know, the 5 men who do what I do, I'm the only woman. So I think that's a positive and a benefit. And things have certainly gotten better over the last 20 years since I've been practicing for women. But actually, honestly, not what I expected. When I was sitting where you are, I thought all's going to be perfect, you know, by the time I'm 20 years in, because it was equal men and women going to law school. And I just thought it'd all be straightened out by that time. I would say it's certainly not, especially at the partner levels.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, you know, I definitely have had experiences in my career where I've been asked if it's been assumed that I'm the court reporter. And so I've been told to set up my transcription machine over there. I've had, you know, can you get the coffee comments? I've had clients not realize that I'm the lead lawyer, back in private practice. I mean, I graduated from law school in 1993. I don't know what you did.
99.
Okay, yeah, so there've been plenty of those moments over the course of my career. And I would say when I was at Goodwin, even though Goodwin, it's larger now, but it was quite large then, I was the only female partner in the white collar crime group. I kind of double majored, and that was one of my majors, so to speak, one of the departments. And I was the only female. And in large measure, that's because most of the people in the white collar crime group tend to be ex-US attorneys. And in Boston, and as is true in many cities, historically, that has been a male bastion. It's sort of like, so there definitely haven't been a lot of women, and there have been those moments. I think, so, and I also think, yes, there have been challenges. In terms of sort of dealing with those challenges or addressing them, I think one thing that has helped is to recognize that, for better or worse, sometimes the path that a female person, a woman might take to partnership or to tenure or to whatever it might be, might not be as much of a straight line as you might have anticipated. Like, life intervenes, and it intervenes for everyone. But I think you have to keep your eye on the ball, sort of long term, what your goals are, and recognize that maybe you won't get there quite the way that you anticipated, but you will get there if you stick with it. And so like when I was coming up for partner, I had my first child before I became a partner, and like sort of there was this ethos at the time, like you'd be right back at work, you'd be fine, right? And like that's just not realistic. You've birthed a human. So I decided that I would take my maternity leave, which many people had not. And I did. And I was very lucky because I had been at the SEC, and nobody else at my firm at that time had been at the SEC. So they needed me. And so I was able to negotiate the deal that I wanted because I had specialized skills. I would say that Professor Boll is excellent at her job. I mean, so people seek her out. They remember you because you're excellent, right? And with excellence and partnership comes the ability to negotiate what you want. So that's what I would say that I did. So I decided I was going to take my maternity leave, and I sort of said, I want to come up for partner like on this date rather than this date. And it all worked out, right? But it, I don't think everyone, when people said like, assume that I was the court reporter or told me to get coffee or assumed that I wasn't the lead lawyer, I don't think it was like malevolent, right? I think it's just, as you say, we have a mental image of what people who do certain jobs look like. And, they might not have walked in expecting the 5'1" female, right? But, just hold on to what you want to do. And, people will eventually recognize your talent and you'll get there. It doesn't mean you won't have frustrations, but you'll get there if you hold on to that goal that you have.
I don't have a tremendous amount to add. I agree with what my two colleagues have said. I would have thought now, as I approach the end of my career, that things would be substantially better for women than they were at the beginning of my career. They are better. They are not substantially better. And business is one of those fields where it has taken a while. And there's some things that you'll see in business that will make you think, okay, this is getting better. For example, most boards and boards of large corporations, Professor Chung can talk to you more about this, are required to have women representation on their board, diverse representation on their board. And that's a really good step, but it doesn't necessarily mean that attitudes have changed, and that attitudes have changed with respect to the lawyers who are doing work for those corporations. I wholly endorse the notion, just get over it. It's going to happen. You are in charge of how you let it affect you. And one thing I can say to you as you're at this stage in your career is there's things you can do to help yourself overcome this. And one of the things I'm going to suggest is true for all of the men in the room as well. You need to learn to talk the talk. When I teach business organizations, I start every class by having my students read an article from the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And part of that is to see that issues that come up in the BizOrg's book, Professor Chung's book, are happening every day in business life. That the things you're reading about, mergers and acquisitions, fiduciary duty issues, securities issues, are almost daily events in the business world and in the news of the business world. The second thing I want my students to see is that they can read the first page of the Wall Street Journal and know what's going on. Maybe not understanding every word, right? Maybe they don't understand every detail of certain financial derivatives, but you need to learn to talk the talk as well as walking the walk. You need, and I know one of the things hopefully one of the things we're going to discuss is how much do you need to know about economics and finance and that sort of thing. Well, the answer to that is at least a bit. You will not be taken seriously as a business lawyer if you don't know basic economics and are able to talk about basic economics. So there are things you can do now to get yourself more ready. Books you can read about economics, listening to Planet Money, listening to, now we have those wonderful podcasts where I understand at your age, you play them at like 3 times the speed. So I want to play them at half the speed so I can understand them. But I do think it really helps as you jump into business law to sometimes put aside the law part of it and focus on the business part of it, because that's the language the people you'll be dealing with speak.
Thank you. And Professor Reyhan, because you did kind of allude to a question we're planning on asking, I'll go ahead and skip to that one. One student question we received was whether you believe a general understanding of finance and economics is necessary to practicing financial law. What advice or resources would you recommend to someone that doesn't have a background in or education in finance, but does want to learn about finance? More specifically, where do you recommend 1L students apply for their summer internships and clerkships if they want to work in financial law? And something that Professor Chung already touched on that's included in this question is, do you recommend starting with government work after graduation and before transitioning into a law firm?
A lot of questions.
Yeah, let me start with the ones I can kind of answer and then defer. First, if you are not a business person, take Professor Boll's business basics class. I have not sat in on it. I hear it's absolutely fabulous. And even if you know a bit about business, why not learn a bit more? So that's a class. I highly recommend to you a book called Naked Economics. It's absolutely the best book on economics I've read, and I understand every word of it, and that's saying something. It'll teach you about the Federal Reserve. It'll teach you about how inflation starts. It'll teach you why globalization is a good and bad thing. It'll get you into the lingo and that sort of thing. And I mentioned before also podcasts. Most of them are short and available to you. Planet Money is excellent. The Indicator is excellent. There's others like that will just get you familiar. Do you have to be an economist? God, no. God help you if you did. Do you have to be a financial expert? Well, not for all of this, but you do have to, to my mind, you can't be afraid of numbers. You can't start by saying, I've had students say, I don't do numbers. Well, whether you go into business law or you're structuring a settlement in torts, or you're dealing with alimony or child support, you're dealing with numbers. So start now getting comfortable with it. It'll be a relief to read Naked Economics instead of reading your case books.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you need to know enough about finance, accounting, and economics to be able to understand what your clients are telling you, because you can't help them achieve their goals, especially in transactional practice, unless you can understand what you're talking about. So something like valuation, you just have to be able to, you have to know what that means, right? And it doesn't mean you have to be the expert. You'll hire a valuation expert, but you have to know what that language is. And so I think that's point one, and I'll have some resources in mind. And a related point is you need to know the range of disciplines that you need to have at least some exposure to practice in this space. So for example, I fundamentally like a securities lawyer, in my heart of hearts, and I'm like embarrassing about how much I love the securities laws. Oh, I'm not doing this, I'm sorry. But in order to do any kind of transactional work, you need to know tax, entity taxation. Now, I am not a tax expert, but I know enough to know to call Professor Boll to be my tax lawyer. No, seriously, because deals are staffed with teams. No one person does everything. You're not an expert at everything. And so you need to know what you know, you need to know what you don't know, and you need to know when to get the expert. So I do think you need some exposure to tax. I mean, I don't think you can practice, have a transactional practice if you have no idea how taxation concerns drive structuring of deals, any number of things in this space. So take some tax, even though it's not a bar course, if you want to practice have a business or transactional law practice. Point one. Point two is don't be afraid of business organizations. I mean, I was an English major, English and Asian studies major in college. I was like, poetry, you know. I don't want to take corps. It was called corps when I was in law school, corporations, you know, but I'm glad, like I actually really like it. And so don't be afraid of courses because you think they're hard. Okay, challenge yourself. If I, in practice, got a resume of a student who didn't take some of these foundational courses and they were looking to have a transactional practice, they wouldn't be as attractive to me. And I did a lot of hiring through summer programs and through, associate hiring generally. Same thing at the SEC. Like if you're going to be at the SEC, you got to understand a little bit about the securities markets. So there's a couple of books. Hold on, I loaned my copy to a student, so I pull it up on my phone. There's a book called How Finance Works, the HBR Guide to Thinking Smart About the Numbers. And the author is, last name is Desai. And this is a great kind of basic book that talks about some basic concepts of financial economics, finance, how it relates to, deal making in the securities markets. And it's a paperback, it's not expensive. I think it's like a 23 bucks on Amazon. It's yellow, bright yellow cover, so I think it's worthwhile. If you find that you want to go work for a financial services firm, like an investment advisor or a broker dealer, like a stock brokerage firm, you may want to consider taking the Securities Industry Essentials exam that FINRA operates, and we have a deal where you can get like an online course. This is the prep book, so you can get the SIE certification. That's something to consider. This is sort of more hardcore working in financial services. And it's not, there's law coverage, but it's really not limited to law, right? And I think you should take Professor Boll's class. And I think that you should prepare yourself to be competitive for a job. Like if you need this basic work to be competitive, I think in a very competitive market where there are a lot of students with good grades, right? And with respect to government service, I think whether you should start there or go there, I think it depends on the nature of the service. Like the enforcement division of the SEC does not generally hire right out of law school because they don't have the resources to train you. They want you to come in knowing how to litigate. And so most of the folks in enforcement lateral in from private practice. Other positions in government are more suited to someone right out of law school. So it depends. The timing of your government service, should you choose to go that route, will depend on the nature, on where you intend to work and what you intend to do there. So I think that was all the questions. Okay.
So I don't have anything to add on the resources. I guess just 2 points. One, classes to take. I would agree to take a basic tax class. If you want to be a business lawyer and you're applying at our firm, I would want to see that you have basic tax, biz orgs, of course. I think having some kind of accounting or financial background is important. The Business for Lawyers class gives you that because I teach it assuming you don't know anything about anything. But even if you do, it's really helpful to then see, well, how does what I know translate to law practice, or how can I use it in my law practice? So it's really helpful for anyone. And then in terms of experience, what might you do in the summer, your first year? If you can get experience with any kind of a law firm or legal experience, that's really good. But actually, one of the things I did in law school before I started working at law firms and in college is I worked for a bank. And that was actually really helpful. I learned a lot about business working for a bank. And, you know, I made $3.75 an hour, so it wasn't too lucrative. You know, I still continued with my law school career. I think I got up to like $6.50 when I left, but that's when it started.
Living large.
I was living large, but I learned a ton about business, banking, working. I ended up being a customer service representative, and, you know, there were a lot of great translatable skills. So even if you can't find a job in law your first summer, which probably you will, but if you don't, or you need to work part-time or something like that, I think, at least for me, that's what I did. And I think I learned a lot from that experience.
I'm going to step back in for 1 minute, and you will think this is self-promotion, but it's not self-promotion. Because I came to teach this class because of how important it is. I do not think it's important because I teach it. I teach it because it's important. And that is commercial law survey or secured transactions. The whole area, and it's one of those things that if you don't take it, you don't know what you don't know. And those are the really dangerous ones. And there's this whole system that overlays our economy of secured transactions, of security interests. Security interests are the personal property equivalent of mortgages in real property. And they are everywhere. You might be sitting on one. They're just absolutely everywhere. They're part of the engine that drives how business works, because most business requires an influx of money, either from investors, and you'll study this in business organizations, that companies get money either from bringing in more investors or from borrowing money. And when you borrow money, virtually no one will lend it to you, you being a corporation, an LLC, a partnership, a person, without taking a security interest in it. So I strongly recommend to you, not because it's on the bar, you'll hear, oh, you do or do not need to take it because it's on the bar. That's not why it's important. It's important because it is such a huge part of business in this country at this time.
Thank you. Now, speaking a little bit more generally, we want to ask, what advice do you have for students who would like to follow a similar career path as you? To this end, one student asked, what is the best advice you've personally ever been given?
Oh, that's hard. I don't think this is the best advice. I think this was the most realistic advice I got. And it kind of, like, it broke my heart a little bit at the time when I got it, but I cynically still believe it to be true. And the advice was, you have to be better. I wish that weren't true, but I think it is. And I think what was embedded, but even if I take a step back from the kind of overtones of that advice, given to me by someone who I trust and has been a phenomenal mentor to me over the years, it's the advice that I would give to you is be excellent. You're asking people to entrust you with difficult things, and you're asking them to pay you a lot of money. I mean, even back when I left in 2007, as a partner, my billing rate was in a large city, was very high, like shockingly high. From my perspective, I'm like, growing up in Albany, I think that if you strive to be excellent, you can't make all the other challenges go away, but you can remove that as an issue why you wouldn't be hired. And be humble. So know what you know what you don't know. Be generous in your referrals to colleagues who have expertise that you lack, and be an ethical, excellent lawyer, because that's really all you can control, right? You can do everything that that's what I'm saying. Be competitive for the job that you want by taking the courses that you need, by seeking out the experience that you need to be competitive for that job. Strive to do your very best work, no matter what the assignment, no matter what, and be generous and kind and ethical in your dealings with your colleagues and with courts or counterparties, whatever it might be. To my mind, there's so much that you don't control about being a lawyer, but those are the things that you control about yourself. And so I think that would be the advice that I would have, that I would give to you just starting out in your career. You're making your reputations every day you come into a class and sit here with your colleagues. And when you're prepared And when you are doing your best work and you are respectful and kind towards your fellow law students, you're setting the stage for what you're going to need to do, in my mind, to be a happy and successful lawyer, because both things are important in my view.
Yeah, I think some of the best advice I received was from my dad, who's 75 now, and he works 6.5 to 7 days a week, and he loves every minute of it. He wouldn't do any less, and he told me, find something you love to do. Don't go to work because you have to be there. Go to work because you can't wait to get there. And I can tell you that every morning I like to be to work at 7 because I like to be there before everyone else. And I love going to work every day. I'm like, all right, what do I need to do? How am I going to organize my day? What's on tap today? And I love helping people. And I even try to love, although these aren't my favorite, when things don't go right. But what I love is, all right, how am I going to handle this? There was a problem here. What am I going to do? So I love problem solving. And, my dad didn't know what would be, exciting to me. He's an excavator, so he rides on bulldozers and stuff, and he loves that. He loved it when he was a young boy, and he loves it now that he's 75. He's just happy he can still climb up there and do that. And so I don't work 7 days a week. I work 5 days a week. I do try to have boundaries, and that also makes me happy. But that would be my advice: is in the legal field, find something you love that you just want to be there every day. And that's different for everybody.
I just want to jump in one thing on that. I have always loved my jobs, but that's not the same thing as saying that I'm going to be a little bit less. It doesn't mean that everything is awesome, right? When you're billing your time in these tiny little increments, I hated billing. It's such a pain, and you gotta, so don't mistake sort of annoyance with some administrative thing with overall, do you love your job, right? Overall, are you pursuing a career path that makes you feel happy and fulfilled? And every job will have its sort of paperwork elements that are just time consuming and not hugely enriching, fulfilling. But there is a little bit of a price that you just pay for the logistics of the job. So when you find that balance is out of whack and there's more things that you don't like than things that you do, that's a sign that you're perhaps not in a role that is sort of meeting your needs right now.
Neither of my two panelists stayed with one thing. And so I'm going to do a couple of things as well, very quickly, in terms of the advice that was given to me, because it's just hard to pick the one thing that really was the advice that made a difference. I think for me, it was being told very early on that being a lawyer is hard, and it's supposed to be. You have the lives and fortunes of your clients in your hands, and that is a huge responsibility. You're becoming professionals, and there's a certain elitism to being a professional. But what a professional means is that you owe your obligations, at least a legal profession, to someone besides yourself. Sometime look at the timestamp of when your deans or professors are sending you emails. You'll see 3:30 in the morning. You'll see 11:30 at night. You don't always have control about when you work. And just be aware of that before you start. One of the reasons, those of you who are in 1L, one of the reasons we give you too much to do is because you're going to have too much to do. And you're going to have to learn to triage it and to figure out how you're going to do that. So that's not inadvertent that we're giving you too much to do. We want you to build the skill set to learn how to balance that. I'm a great lover of the Louise Penny books, the Inspector Gamache books. I don't know if any of you read them, but he has 4 phrases to live by. He's a police inspector. Right now, I can only remember 3. I am sorry, I don't know, and I need help. All 3 of those things, in addition to kindness and caring and that sort of thing. If you screw up, say you're sorry, right? If you don't know, say you don't know, and you'll find out. And if you need help, ask for help. Your colleagues in the law school will help you. Your colleagues in life will help you. Jennifer will tell you, I'm sure, that her partners have helped all the way along, and Christine as well.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time for today, but we want to thank you for joining us, and a special thank you to our panelists for sharing their stories and answering our questions. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.